Thanks for joining me on episode 784 of the Inspired Stewardship Podcast.
I'm Matt.
And I'm Jocelyn.
From the Family Life Movement Podcast.
We challenge you to find a way to balance your work and your family, and one way to be inspired to do that is to listen to this.
The Inspired Stewardship Podcast by my friend Scott Mater.
And then we have other areas where the truth is 80% of the way there is more than good enough. And you should quit and save that time so that you can use it elsewhere where it would have a much bigger impact on your life, on your freedom, on your flexibility, and allow you to focus on your priorities more.
Welcome and thank you for joining us on the Inspired Stewardship Podcast. If you truly desire to become the person who God wants you to be, then you must learn to use your time, your talent, and your treasures for your true calling. In the Inspired Stewardship Podcast, you will learn to invest in yourself, invest in others, and develop your influence so that you can impact the world.
In today's episode about investing in others through stewarding your talent, I talk with you about the difference between perfectionism and sloppiness. I also talk about the pros and cons of both, and I share with you some tips on how you can avoid both of them.
You've heard me talk about developing your talent, and one of the best ways to do that is through books. But if you're like most people today, it's hard to find the time to read. And that's why today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Go to inspiredstewardship.com/audible to sign up, and you can get a 30-day free trial. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from, and you can pick one and listen your way to developing your talents via Audible. That's inspiredstewardship.com/audible to get your free trial and listen to great books the same way you're listening to this podcast.
At first glance, this idea of perfectionism versus sloppiness may seem like a crazy one to talk about. But the truth is, perfectionism and sloppiness, they aren't completely the same or opposite either. There are pros and cons to both. There are reasons to pay attention to both. Let me define what I mean. Perfectionism is this idea or this feeling, comes in kind of two flavors. One is the feeling that nothing you do is good enough, that no work that you deliver is ever good enough, that you should always improve it more, that even after you've turned it over and said that this is it, I'm done, you still think to yourself, you still have this sort of imposter syndrome feeling of, no, it's really not good enough, and eventually they're going to figure this out. And sloppiness here, I'm defining not as not wearing nice clothes or being disorganized, but rather recognizing that there's work that at times just doesn't need the same attention to detail as other work, that there are things that you can let go intentionally or let be delivered a little less stringently intentionally. And if you look at it that way, then sometimes sloppiness has a place. The pros, the good things about perfectionists, well, they do tend to actually deliver work that is exacting, that it's held to high standards. You don't have to go to a perfectionist and say, these are the standards to which I'm going to hold you, because the truth is they're already holding themselves to higher standards than you could ever set. You instead have to reassure them there is work that they're doing well, that things are being delivered at a standard that you not only find acceptable, but that you find excellent. And with sloppiness, of course, the danger, the risk is always one of delivering work that is subpar, of taking shortcuts on work that's important and delivering something that doesn't work or that works much less well than it should. But pros of sloppiness is it tends to be done quicker. It tends to be gotten out there where now you can learn from the real world. Because see, one of the cons of perfectionism is it tends to be held to a standard that is artificial. It's not the standard of the marketplace. It's not the standard of the client or the customer. Instead, it's the standard that you hold yourself to, which, as I mentioned earlier, tends to be a standard that is higher than what anyone else would set for you. So the con of perfectionism is that it's slower and that it doesn't get out there into the real world where you can see the results of the work, where you can iterate and learn from it. The truth is, neither one of these is something that is applicable in all cases. Neither one of these is something that is all good or all bad. Instead, the truth is, what makes it good or bad is where it shows up and how intentional you are in letting them show up in the right place. If you've heard of the 80-20 rule, this idea that 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort, that's almost always true. The truth is you can get 80% of the way to perfection with much less effort. And it takes you that other 80% of the effort to get you closer to 100%, even though you never probably really reach 100%. To even get you above 80 takes huge effort. And when you begin to recognize that, then you can begin to look at the work that you have and begin to decide where are the places where it's worth putting in that extra work? Where are the places where that 20% level of improvement is worth 80% of the work? I would argue if you're a heart surgeon, I hope that you put in that additional 80% of the effort if you're doing open heart surgery on me or someone that I love or care about. But on the other hand, if you're doing a quick report for your client or for a boss, then that 80% level might be good enough. It depends on the impact of the report. You actually have to think about what's the purpose behind this work? What's the need? What is the level of criticality to which having 100% accurate information is important? I work with a lot of people on time and money, and one of the things that we focus on is where is it worth actually paying attention at that level of detail, whether it's your time or your money. Where do you want to zero in and make a commitment and actually spend the time and the effort to make sure that you're doing it perfectly? And where is it okay to have a little sloppiness? Where is it okay to have a little bit of an error? Where is it okay to do a little less effort? Because that frees up time and money that you can use in other places without a huge impact on your life. And we all have areas like that in all components of our life. We all have areas where it is important that we spend that extra 80% of the effort to get that extra 20% of the benefit. And then we have other areas where the truth is 80% of the way there is more than good enough. And you should quit and save that time so that you can use it elsewhere where it would have a much bigger impact on your life, on your freedom, on your flexibility, and allow you to focus on your priorities more. So where in your life are you currently either being sloppy when you should actually be perfectionistic? Or conversely, where are you spending your time trying to reach perfection when actually a little sloppiness would be okay? Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to the Inspired Stewardship podcast. As a subscriber and listener, we challenge you to not just sit back and passively listen, but act on what you've heard and find a way to live your calling. If you like this episode on the stewardship of talent, you can go over to inspiredstewardship.com/talent and sign up for our 5-week series on the stewardship of talent. Or if you're in the U.S., you can text 44222 talent tips That's talent tips to 44222 and get those tips. Until next time, invest your time, your talent, and your treasures. Develop your influence and impact the world.